now. So, all right. Yeah. So Robert Swartwood here. I'm here with Mr. Brian Keene. My good friend Brian. How long have we known each other, Brian?
Oh God, I was trying to figure that out the other day. My youngest son asked me. It's been almost 20 years, if not over 20 years.
So, I mean, we obviously, I've grown up in the same area. I've mostly been in the central Pennsylvania region most of my life. So have you. Well, I mean, at least for the last 20 years. So, I mean, it was inevitable, I think, that our paths would cross. Obviously I was at, World Horror Conventions and Nikon. I think, we would see each other there. And then there was Horror Find, which when they had it down in Maryland. And for a time I was living very close to Jesus, JF Gonzalez. And, but I don't know at what point we got to a place where, I don't know, but
It's fun. Like I was telling my son, I first remember you. I always think of you and Brian James Freeman from Cemetery Dance and Jared Sandman. There were a bunch of you, and you were literally kids. I think you guys were in college. I think Jared may have still been in high school. So I always thought of you guys as like kids. You were good kids, but you were kids. And then I don't know, one day Jesus and I were talking, and he had gone to lunch with you, and he was telling me, you were thinking about getting into self-publishing. And I need the audience to understand that Jesus Gonzalez and I, we came up in a generation when that was a no-no. You did not self-publish. Self-publishing equated vanity press. And that was for losers and hacks and people who, didn't want to go through the professional toil of writing and selling a book. And when Jesus told me about it, he was excited. He was enthusiastic. He talked about, how you'd laid it all out and how it was really smart and how self-publishing didn't need to have that stigma anymore. And I think that's when I realized, because I talked to you soon after that, and I realized Rob is not a little kid anymore. He's a really smart dude. And I think after that, our friendship grew. I didn't keep that barrier. I didn't see you as a kid anymore.
Well, that's interesting. So, I mean, I will say, and I just want to kind of, hopefully now that we have maybe some people tuning in, our discussion really is about mostly because you basically announced that you're going to be now having your own imprint. Other writers have done this, and we're going to get into that. But for you, for the longest time, I mean, you were dabbling in self-publishing. You were putting out some books here and there, but for the most part, you were still dealing with a majority of your backlist with other publishers. And now you've kind of decided to make that leap in doing it yourself. So let's jump right into 2003. The Rising, your first novel, was published by Delirium. Next year, Leisure Books puts it out as a mass market paperback.
Right.
I mentioned in one of the notes I sent you, I hadn't meant to send that because I wanted to be a surprise, because I don't know if you remember that I was there at Barnes and Noble in New York City. I don't want to know if it was I guess it would have been was it World Horror Convention or
it wasn't a World Horror Convention.
It was a Bram Stoker weekend.
It was a Bram Stoker Awards weekend.
Because I think it was the year, for whatever reason, Barnes & Noble, I was there. I think I was there with Jack Fisher. There was a reading. I think maybe Doug Clegg was doing something. And then all I remember is people are kind of, the event's over. People are leaving. Don Dioria kind of pulls you aside. And I remember being there with Jack Fisher, and we're kind of like within ear, we can hear. And he's basically talking about how he really likes your book and he wants to publish it. And you're like, oh, I think you were playing it cool. you weren't like, jumping for joy, but you're like, oh yeah, that sounds great. And I don't know if it's in my mind or not, or maybe now this is just, maybe this is just kind of some creative nonfiction, but I almost feel that after that exchange, Jack and I looked over at you and you looked at us and you like gave us a nod or like some type of acknowledgement.
Yep. I remember that. Yeah. It was, and I played it cool, but this was something that I had worked not only my entire adult life, but through most of my teenage and childhood years to achieve. So, can I curse on your live stream?
Absolutely.
I was fucking ecstatic. And then it was just, I think, a month after that, the Horrifying convention in Baltimore, Don hand delivered my contract to me there. And I got our friend Dallas Mayer, who the public knows as Jack Ketchum, to basically negotiate the contract for me in the bar. But that's a whole different discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, that is a discussion where, you've been very, I would say, agent adverse when it comes to like book publishing.
Not adverse. I have nothing against literary agents. I think a good agent can be absolutely invaluable to a writer who needs one. I'm lucky to have never needed one. Part of that is, as I said, Dallas Mayer, who people don't know, long before he was Jack Ketchum, he was a literary agent. He was an agent for Philip K. Dick. He was an agent for Henry Miller. He knew his business. So he kind of taught me, here's what to look for. Here's not what to accept. But, I also have a varied background, one thing of which is, strong sales ability and an ability to read over contracts and parse what it means. So I've never needed an agent to sell a book for me. In fact, I can think of two publishers who have told me, if you'd used an agent, you would have probably got less in the deal. But I'm not against agents. If you're not comfortable selling yourself or selling your work or marketing it, if you don't have the contacts, if you don't know how to read a contract, then yeah, by all means, use an agent. And I should note, I do use an entertainment lawyer. I don't use it for publishing, but anytime there's a movie or a video game or something like that, I haven't, because those contracts are labyrinthian. I have somebody go over those for me.
All right. Well, so let's talk about like how publishing was back then in the early 2000s. So, and the same thing with the bookstores. I mean, we had more bookstores than obviously we do now, at least here in the United States. Right now we have Barnes Noble, Books A Million, and then there's independent bookstores. As opposed to back then, Barnes Nobles, I guess Books A Million probably existed, independent bookstores. But then there was also Walden Books, Dalton.
B. Dalton, Bradley's Books, which used to be a much bigger chain. Now they're basically limited to Pennsylvania and Ohio.
And even in grocery stores, grocery stores would have a nice book section. I've not seen, they've gone away, at least in my local grocery stores within the past couple of years. There used to be a nice, mass market paperbacks, even some trade paperbacks that they would carry. Yep. Now, nothing.
Yep. Yeah, it was a very different landscape. There were more books available, at a retail level. I would say there are probably easily more books being published now. But I'm talking about, without having to go on Amazon and order them. There were more books available to the reader, and there was more variety. We still had what's called a mid list. I don't know if we need to explain that term to the audience or not. What do you think?
They can Google it.
Okay, yeah, Google the mid list. And as we said, self-publishing was sort of this no-no because the technology did not exist yet to do it right. Self-publishing back then was you paid these vanity presses thousands of dollars to publish your book, and you couldn't get it into bookstores, and you couldn't sell it online unless you had your own website. And more importantly, you didn't go through the editorial process. You didn't learn how to make your writing better by getting those rejections. But then, there were a number of factors that changed. The mid list died off, at least for horror. It certainly died off. These days, indie publishing is the de facto mid list. But more importantly, Amazon came along with KDP. Well, Create Space first, and then KDP, and leveled the playing field for self-publishing. Suddenly, it's a viable option. And in fact, it's an increasingly lucrative option.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, the thing about self-publishing, well, if it's weird because you look at music, you look at movies, being an independent artist in those mediums, you know, in those genres, like people are praised, you know, is always a huge thing. People are, I think, are even encouraged, you know, produce your own albums, you know, you can produce your own movies. But when it came to publishing, it's was still, I would say, even right now, even with, you know, the last 10 years, self-publishing has come a long way. There are still people who still look down on it,
Mhm.
mostly because I guess that like old school thinking. Um, Whereas before, and like you mentioned before, I mean, there was all those bookstores. The only way it was the distribution. I mean, you could self-publish, it could be a great book, but if bookstores did not carry your book, how were readers going to find it? It's not like there was social media like there is nowadays. The only way people found books was in a bookstore or in a library. And, you know, maybe a bookstore might be willing to stock something, but it would be on like consignment. And to actually, you know, have, I mean, you would have to, I mean, there wasn't even, I guess, I mean, back then, was there print on demand, or you were basically having to like buy, you know, 100, 1,000,
I
5,000
mean, early
copies?
on, yeah, you had to buy copies. Your print run was however many copies you bought. Then there was the early print on demand. Remember Lulu.com and
And they were
places like that.
shitty.
And yeah, I mean, those books
I mean, the
fell
quality and
apart.
the quality in print on demand has just it's really amazing to how these books have been like 20 years ago, print on demand, as opposed to the print on demand now, which is almost the same quality as just a book that you would find at like a Barnes and Noble. In fact, even KDP with their hardcover print on demand is, I would say, just the same like level of quality, quite honestly.
Well, it is. And, I think it should be noted. I wouldn't say all, certainly, but the majority of indie publishers in our field are using KDP or the equivalent, the some print on demand equivalent, to produce their titles now. And they look just as professional and just as well manufactured as something from the mainstream press.
So, you know, you were publishing with Leisure, you were publishing with other publishers as well, but still, you know, self-publishing was not, you know, anything that you really probably even considered. I mean, it was
No,
something that just, it was never in the back of your head. Of course, then there's the, you know, Leisure tanks. Um, a lot of writers basically became homeless from their publishers. You know, Jesus, JF Gonzalez, he took most of his backlist that he got from Leisure, ended up putting it out himself.
right.
You decided to kind of go another way with a publisher. Some other writers, you know, Doug Clegg comes to mind. He decided to kind of, you know, basically take his backlist and just make it available himself, because around that time ebooks were coming. I mean, ebooks had been around for a while, but I think to the rise of Amazon, I know everyone wants to shit on, you know, Amazon, and for good reason, for, you know, a variety of things, but they really have, you know, the same thing with like Elon Musk. He's a piece of shit, but he really revolutionized in terms of electric car market. The same thing too with Amazon. I mean, they really brought, I mean, if it wasn't for Amazon, I don't think e-readers would be as plentiful and as, you know, and as mostly used by almost everybody as they
Right.
are now. At this point, even if you don't have an e-reader, everybody has a smartphone or they have a tablet where they can just download the app for a Kindle or whatever else. So suddenly, after all this time, distribution where there was none for just any Joe Schmo writer is now basically literally in the pocket of every single person in the world.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And
Um,
it's hard to impress upon, somebody in their 20s or 30s now, just how much of a sea change that is. I mean, Jesus and I, even before Leisure collapsed and the small press collapsed right around that same time, basically hard died, just like it had in the early 90s. But, we had talked about launching our own publishing company, something like Cemetery Dance or Subterranean Press or Arkham House. But just the technology was never there and we didn't have the money to do it. And when those things happened, when Leisure went down and the small press collapsed, I want to impress upon the audience, in the space of a month, 1 month's time, I lost about 85% of my annual income. Stopped. It's gone. Um, I never did get the money Leisure owed me. And I, there were several small presses that went out owing me money. Jesus, he still had a day job as a tech writer. His wife, Kathy, was working. He was able to take the gamble and start self-publishing. Our friend Doug Clegg, who you mentioned, he was able to do it. I wanted to, but I was still very cautious about it. I was already broke, and I had come off a decade of not being broke, of making really good money writing, novels about zombies and giant worms and bullshit like that. I didn't have the guts to take the gamble and go all in. So what I tried to do is I tried to keep one foot in mainstream publishing. Occasionally I'd do something with like Macmillan or others. And most of my backlist I gave to indie publishers like Deadite Press, who were brand new at the time. And it became very lucrative over time. Over time, I was making more from indie publishing than I ever was from mass market. But as I, here in the last few years, particularly ever since Jesus and Tom Piccirilli and a few of our other friends passed, as you know personally, my sons are very important to me, and my partner, author Mary San Giovanni, is very important to me. And I don't want, if I pop tomorrow of a heart attack because, some asshole said something mean on Twitter, I don't want them to have to chase down my royalties every month from 7 different publishers. And I'm not saying any of these publishers would, deliberately screw them, but I don't want them to figure out who has the rights to what, who's publishing what, who's paying for what. It dawned on me that it's time to bring everything in-house, just as Jesus had done. So yeah, that's what I'm in the process of doing now. And it's finally to the point where, technology being what it is, I can do that. I can even go offset printing if I want. I can produce a book manufacturing wise that, we can stack up against anything the mainstream is putting out. And I have enough of a following, enough of an audience. I know factually, I've talked to buyers for 2 of the chains that we still have left, 2 of the chain bookstores. They're interested. They're like, yes, keep us posted as you do this. So yeah, it's, why not? Now's the time. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not like you.
Right. Well, just a little bit. So for me, the dream was always, I wanted my first book to be trade hardcover, whatever my novel was going to be, so, I did go the agent route. I mean, I've gone through a couple different agents. Some have been good, some have been there, I've never had a bad agent. The one I have right now is really great. And the benefit from her is, she definitely gets me, through the door for places that I cannot. I mean, to editors and publishers that just, even if you knew them, like they only really take, agent and manuscripts.
Right.
So even like my very first book, a mutual friend of ours, and this was a long time ago, this was back when Leisure was around. He had even offered to speak to Don, on my behalf about this book, like, to give it to him. But again, in my head, I still had this idea where I wanted to, it had to be I wanted to do a trade hardcover, in bookstores. And I was like, nah, it's okay. I appreciate it. And then, what happened was, I was still writing books. I got an agent. We shopped those around, the very first one was Man of Wax. It didn't sell, but, I knew it was still a good book. And
Right.
I would say, having gone through, at that point, I had gone through, I think, 2 agents. We had shopped around stuff, because I think a lot of people have this idea that they get an agent and then that's it. They're going to sell a book, which is far from the truth. It's very difficult to get an agent. And then once you have an agent, it's difficult then to get a book deal. So,
Yep.
But basically I had these novels that then were just kind of sitting on my computer. And then that's when, Kindle came around with the ebooks. Actually, David B. Silva at the time had taken some of his, short stories. He was a great short story writer, and some of his books, and he basically was also putting them online and having a really, really great success. And, mutual friends of, Jay, Joe Conrath and then Blake Crouch, and basically seeing a lot of these people have success. And I'm like, I have these books just sitting here. I know they're good. We've already shopped them around. Publishers didn't want them. I might as well just put them up there. And I have this conspiracy theory that Amazon was doing something behind the scenes, because in the early days, where we call them like the gold rush days, you could literally upload an ebook and in the first month sell a couple thousand.
Oh yeah.
I mean, some of these authors were making, I think one of my first years, only off of a handful of titles, not doing any promotion whatsoever, I made like 60 grand, which was insane. But nowadays, there's just so many books out there. I don't know if but again, so my conspiracy theory is that Amazon was basically kind of like juicing the algorithm for these independent writers, because they wanted to basically, say to others, to the more established people who were in publishing, hey, you don't need these publishers. You can come do this. And what's funny now is Dean Koontz, actually, at least in the United States, his United States publisher is Thomas and Mercer, which is an imprint of Amazon Publishing.
Yep.
And some of his backlist, he's now self-publishing. I mean, if you look at some of, I think there's at least 5 or 6 titles, they are basically, published through KDP. The paperback that he has in there is print on demand. And what's kind of funny is, okay, so again, we don't want to get much into the weeds, but with KDP, you can basically publish a paperback. They will provide you an ISBN for free. ISBNs are this, every book has an ISBN that basically says, is basically like a social security number for a book. Yeah, on the back of the book is that
this thing right here.
So you can actually buy your own ISBNs, which to be your own quote unquote publisher. Or, Amazon, you can just use their free ones, but essentially it will come up showing it's, published through Amazon. These paperbacks that Dean Koontz has put out just say independently published on there. I mean, he's just using the free ISBN. Dean Koontz, who sold millions and millions of books across the country, or, so, I mean, yeah, it's really crazy just to think about how things have really changed. But I think what it really comes down to is just the distribution model. For me, it was always what can a publisher do for me that I cannot do for myself? Now, granted, there are a few things back in the day. The main one was getting you in bookstores, and that's still the case now. But also just look at like the shelf life for a lot of books. I mean, I love used bookstores. Yeah, I mean, and I love used bookstores. I love walking around used bookstores. But if you look at used bookstores from a from like a writer point of view, it's also very sobering, because you will find these books that, from authors who maybe seem like they were going to be the next big thing 10, 15 years ago. They published 2 or 3 books, and that's it. You never heard from them again. And mostly because, publishing's tough. It's all based on numbers. Under a pen name, I had a book go to auction, which basically meant like more than one publisher was interested, and they were like, making bids on the book. We sold it for a nice chunk of change. The publisher put a lot of promotion behind the first book. I mean, they had like an in-house publicist. There was an outside publicist. They did all of this stuff, and it did well. But then the second book comes along, nothing, not even an in-house publicist. It was basically like, okay, here's a bunch of copies. You can do with them as you please. And I mean, that's really, this idea that I always hear from a lot of writers, it's like, well, I need a publisher for this. The publisher is going to do everything. And it's like, the reality is the publisher's not, yes, they'll do a few things, but the majority of the stuff, like, especially when it comes to promotion, it really falls on the writer.
Absolutely. I'll share an anecdote. I'm not going to share names because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. You and I have a mutual friend, younger author. They've just sold their first mass market book, their first mainstream book. And, they mentioned to the in-house publicist that I was going to help them with marketing and promotion and give them some ideas. So I ended up on an email list with the editor and several people from the marketing department and the publicist and an outside publicist that they had brought in. And to paraphrase, it basically came down to, okay, Brian, tell us how to do this and tell us what you're going to do. Because they had no plans. You know, if your marketing plan, if you're a multi-million-dollar company publisher and your marketing plan is, let's go ask Brian Keene what to do, you know, your publisher can't do anything for you that you can't do yourself.
Yeah, no, it's nuts.
Yeah.
Like a writer friend of mine, he recently had a new book come out. The publisher leading up to the release of the book kind of fucked up the cover, which basically delayed the publication date. And the book came out. It's available in independent bookstores, Barnes Noble, not on Amazon. Right. So all these pre-orders right now, it's up in the air whether or not these people are going to get these pre-orders. And as no, you know, everybody wants to show it on Amazon. And again, there's good reason for it. The reality is the majority of books sold are through Amazon. So even, you know, having a publisher does not mean that everything's going to be roses, because stuff happens. I mean, yeah, I can't even imagine, you know, having your book come out and it's basically the biggest bookseller in the world. And not only don't they have it in stock, they took away the buy button. So people can't even, like, you know, at least buy it or at least have it on there for when they have it available. And, right, you know, that's not the only thing. I mean, it happens all the time. Off the top of my head, I was even thinking about, there was a publisher years and years and years ago who the book was going to come out in hardcover. I think it was Walmart decided, we don't like this cover. So all of a sudden the publisher is like, okay, well, we're going to release this instead in mass market paperback. And that, I mean, just, you know, it's just, the publishing is just a crazy business. I don't know why any of us even want to get into it.
And, you know, some people will say, well, I don't want to self-publish. You know, what if I make a formatting error? What if I mess my book up? Mainstream publishers do that too. And I'm not disparaging anybody, but look at our good friend Paul Tremblay. What happened with his latest book? You know, the Kindle edition, there were all kinds of formatting errors in the original edition. And poor Paul starts getting 1-star reviews, not for the book, not for the story, but because people couldn't read it on their Kindle. You know, now to their credit, the publisher fixed it right away, but, you know, that can happen to anybody. You know, don't think that, oh, well, my publisher is going to get it right, because they're not always going to get it right either. You know, Nick Mamatas and I, our novel, The Damned Highway, the trade paperback and Kindle editions of that through the original publisher were never correct. The final sentence of the book was missing. So, you know, there's a stinger in the final sentence, and it wasn't until we got the rights back and re-released it last year that people finally got to read the book as intended. You know, things like that happen.
Well, right. And I mean, so when we talk about self-publishing, though, clearly the main word is self. So right, obviously the writer is the one who is, okay. So the main thing with publishing, you sell a book, publisher gives you an advance. And basically the advance is an advance. We'll just keep it low. We'll say $10,000. Okay. Right. The publisher gives you $10,000. And basically that gets paid out over the course of, you might get half on signing, and then when the book comes out, or when you turn in the manuscript, whatever else. But basically the only way that advance earns out, or you can start making royalties, is the book needs to sell so many copies of hardcover, ebook, whatever else, to basically for them to recoup that money. And then at that point you start making royalties. So the publisher not only pays you the advance, then obviously, you know, they pay the production of the books, for the cover art, for the editing, for everything else. So the publisher basically is taking that cost, that they're eating that upfront cost. With self-publishing, the writer is the one who is basically having to foot that bill at the very beginning. Right. It could be, you know, even the cost of editing, the cost of formatting the book, the cost of cover art. I have a book that's going to be coming out next month. The formatting, and we can get into this too, you know, they now have programs out there that are very easy to, like, do your own formatting. So, you know, mostly that's just spending the time. But, you know, cover art, I don't do my own cover art. I have a designer. I had a developmental editor that I worked with previously on a book from from a major publisher. I reached out to him to do a pass through of the book. I would say probably all said and done, before the book even comes out, I'm probably in the hole, I don't know, rounded up to like $2,000. Okay.
Yeah,
That's a lot of money
right.
I mean, that's a lot of money. But again, especially when it comes to ebooks, the return on investment could be huge because you're not sharing any of that with any other publishers. Typically, especially with ebooks, most major publishers, 25% is the royalty rate for the ebooks.
Yep.
So even like on a $4.99 ebook, 25% is less than $1.25.
Yep.
Okay. A $4.99 ebook, if you were to self-publish it, most platforms, I think almost all the platforms give you at least 70% royalties. And again, the majority of books now, that are not in bookstores are digital.
Right.
So they're going to be doing it. So, I mean, but 70% royalties, you're looking at almost $350 per unit sold. So I mentioned before about this new book coming out. Say I'm like $2,000 in the hole. The price is $5.99. So 70%, I'm looking at a little over $4 a pop, right? I only have to sell maybe like 500 copies to earn back that money,
right,
which is nothing. Quite honestly,
right.
When we look at our readerships, I mean, 500, nothing. And of course, that doesn't include, advertising, because especially nowadays, I mean, I hate Facebook, but Facebook ads, I mean, you can target. I mean, think about, back in the day to just get the word out to readers. How would you even really do that without, but with social media, it doesn't even cost that much to make people aware that a book exists.
Yeah.
You can get out to thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands of people for a very small fee. So, I mean, again, that's the one nice thing about Facebook. Everything else about it is awful. But anyway, so basically once you earn back, that money that you've spent, it's just pure, it's just all, it's just all gravy there.
Well, it is. And, we mentioned earlier, Mary San Giovanni, my dear partner. She's been doing this as long as I have. She is not all in on self-publishing. She doesn't want to do it. Part of it is what you said, that old school mentality of she still wants, the trade hardcover and the mass market paperback. And she's still able to get those things. And I don't fault her for that. She knows what she wants. But the other thing she says is, she doesn't want to make that initial investment. Like we said, it's about $2,000. And she doesn't want to have to then spend months promoting the book and buying ads and doing signings and reaching readers. And I always tell her, well, you're going to do the same thing, even with a traditionally published book. She has a novel coming out from Titan next year, Alien Enemy of My Enemy. It's a great book. Titan, I'm very impressed. They have an actual marketing and publicity plan for her. But she's still going to have to do those things. She's still going to have to do signings and promote the book on her own as well. So I don't buy that as an argument to not get into self-publishing.
Yeah, I mean, even being, even if the publisher paid you $1 million, it's not like you're just going to sit on your ass and not do anything. They're going to put you out on the road. They expect you to promote this book. Granted, in that case, you get a lot of money, and of course, the publisher most likely is going to be paying for your travel and your hotel and everything else.
Right.
But,
and let's be honest, for genre fiction, the most a publisher is probably going to do, they'll put it up on NetGalley, so you get some reviews on Goodreads. I'm not convinced that Goodreads sells books, but you'll get some book reviews from bloggers and on Instagram, etc. Maybe they get you a couple interviews in the press. Maybe they buy some ads in a few trade magazines or fan magazines, but that's it. The max, the majority of their promotional budget are going to go to authors who are already big and earning them money. That's just the nature of the beast. So whether you're indie, whether you're mainstream, whether you're self-published, in 2022, an author has to promote. Unless you're Bentley Little you have to go out and let readers know your book is out. You just have to, if you want to continue to do this for a living.
I mean, that's, I mean, that,
if you're gonna invest all that energy, why split it with a publisher when you can just take all the profit yourself?
well, not only that though, I mean, I always find too that, and in a way, I mean, I've dipped my toes, you know, I mean, I would consider myself at this point a hybrid author, which I think there's going to be a lot more hybrid authors in the future. So, you know, I will self-publish. I have no hesitation self-publishing something. Like right now, you know, we're shopping around a book. If I don't sell it, I'll self-publish it. Like I don't care. And quite honestly, if we, you know, if a publisher puts in an offer and it's and I see that it's not even worth my time, you know what I mean? Like if I realize, well, I could make more money right out of the gate just self-publishing it, why would I, you know, go with the publisher? So, you know, I think writers have a lot more, they have a lot more power than they did in the past. In the past, it was basically, you know, publishers threw scraps to them and it was like, here you go, what are you going to do? Because you had no option. Here you at least have that option. And for me, what I find one of so back in the day, I used to be an evangelist when it came to self-publishing. I would tell everybody this is
Oh, I
great. You know,
remember.
there's like so many benefits from this. And then it got to a point where I just kind of stopped because I felt like, you know, people would be able to see it for their own eyes. All these authors who have been having success. Now, granted, there are a lot of authors who self-publish who do not have success.
Right.
I mean, you know, they are just, no matter what they do, they're just not having success. But guess what? Even writers who are going with publishers, you know, many writers do not have success either. So, but at least, you know, you're putting more of your future in your own hands. And because they're your books and they're your own, you know, you basically control the entire thing, you know, you have more like, well, I'm okay. So as an example, you had a book from a publisher and, you know, the book came out a couple of years ago and then you know, it just sits there. The publisher basically has moved on to other, you know, authors who they're dealing with right now at front list. You know, the great thing for me is like, even like with a book club, like I can take one of my old titles and still try to promote it, still try to get juice out of it. You know, you can still, you know, you can still just really, you know, work on it. And because, you know, you have that control. You know, if you want to focus on a book that came out 10 years ago to maybe put like a new cover on it, you know, to try to help just kind of like refresh it for readers, you can do that. No problem. You know, good luck if it's with a publisher who bought it 10 years ago. They're not gonna, they don't give a shit about that anymore, unless it's, you know, a title that has been selling really great. But for 99.5% of writers, you know, after the first year, you know, there's really nothing you can do about it.
I'll give you an example. My novel Darkness on the Edge of Town, which came out, I don't know, maybe 2009. And then around, what year did Jesus die? Was it 2015? Something like that.
I mean, it was before Trump. I know that.
Yeah, it was before Trump. So right before Trump, Stephen King tweets some very nice public comments about Darkness on the Edge of Town. I'm like, hey, can I use them for a blurb? Sure, go ahead. Except that blurb still hasn't made it onto the cover of the book. You know, if you're self-publishing, you can immediately, you have access to the files. You can, you know, upload it, new cover tomorrow, bam, there's your blurb. And as you said, you're getting mileage on an old book. You're getting money out of it again. You know, something else you touched on, you know, you talked about being a hybrid. We don't talk enough in this industry about ageism. It's something that I absolutely believe exists in publishing. I don't mean to overshadow the struggles of any other marginalized group. Those are important as well. And I think you and I both have fought for those for 20 years. But ageism is also something that exists. And you see a lot of authors who are now in their 70s who are having to self-publish simply because nobody wants to publish their backlist anymore. And some of them are, you know, names, giants to us. I think people my age, people your age, who have made a career out of this, need to think about that, because you mentioned the future. There's going to come a time when your books at your publisher aren't selling the way they used to. And, your editor is going to retire and a new editor is going to come in, and they're not going to get what you're doing. Oh, he's that old guy, Rob Swartwood. I don't know what these books are, I say better now to at least dip your toes in, get your feet wet, familiarize yourself with the process. So if you do ever find yourself in that situation, it's easier to transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and honestly, and this goes back to an author. I don't want to name him. I mean, there's no reason, I guess, not to name him, but like, he publisher had done a few books for him. It was a Random House imprint. They were doing okay, won some awards or whatever else, but then, just, I guess, sales weren't there. They dropped him. He just kind of kept the series going, started self-publishing them. He's probably up to like 12 or 15 books in the series right now, killing it.
Yep.
Just because, he was just able to keep that momentum going, to build that readership. And he's doing great, selling a shitload of books, making a shitload of money. The publishers, they weren't interested. And what's funny recently is even the Random House imprint titles, because I guess he rebranded his self-published books.
Right.
I don't know how he worked it out with them, but they also then took that same branding and added it to the first couple, because I think because his self-published stuff was selling so well, his backlist, because it was the first couple books in the series, were also doing well. So in many ways, the publisher dropped him, but then still benefits from the fact that, he ended up going and, self-publishing himself. I mean, really what it comes down to is, and a lot of times I think this is always missed. And even, depending on if you want to self-publish or just go with regular publishing, it's a business. And so I think oftentimes, there's a lot of workshops. I know you're doing, Borderlands boot camp. And this is actually something I meant to ask, mention to you. I don't obviously think you want to spend a lot of time on it, but at least touch base on the fact that, it's a business. You got to understand how the business works.
Actually, our plan for 2024, I haven't told you this yet, but I will now, you and the rest of the world. Our plan for 2024 is to have you as our guest speaker. Nice. For Saturday night, and we'll pay for you and everything, and we want you to explain that in detail.
Well, okay, sure.
I'm serious.
Okay, sure. So now you lost my train of thought. But no, I mean, so like basically, so there were things that I wish I knew now, or no, then that that I know now. Like when I was making all that money from self-publishing the first couple of years, like almost 60 grand in the first, like to really understand how like self-employment works,
yes,
what stuff you can write off, the benefits, like really quite honestly, I know a lot of people, it is a cost, but I would always recommend get a good accountant who understands, the self-publishing or with whatever else.
Yep.
Every year my accountant, he's more than I would like to spend, but it's worth it, because there have even been times where I've gotten letters from the IRS. He takes care of it. Yep. But I mean, just really being aware of, and then so when it comes down to self-publishing, yes, okay, that $2,000 we talked about, they're all business expenses. Okay, yeah. You know what I mean? And so the same thing too, like even like say, going to, driving to the bookstore to do a signing or whatever else, make sure you are tracking that mileage, all just little stuff really adds up, because at least in the United States, self-employment tax, it's like 30%, at the very least. And, that really adds up, especially because writers, for the majority, do not get paid that much. We talked before about the example of the $10,000. If you have an agent, 15% of that's going to the agent. Then after that, you got 30%. You might end up with maybe 45% of the $10,000 or 65% of the $10,000. So
I always tell people, listen to the song Rock Superstar by Cypress Hill, not Rap Superstar, Rock Superstar. If you change the references to the music business to publishing, it's all very good advice. But the one particular lyric that always stands out is they say, save your money too. A hit single doesn't last very long. It's the same in our field. Save your money. A bestseller doesn't last very long, as you just said. You'll have really good years and you'll have not so good years. And there's no way to to tell. It's very clear to me that we're heading for another economic recession globally. I think we're already in it. The experts say we'll be in it next year. I think it's already here. People are not going to have money to spend on books. They're not going to have money to spend on streaming. You're going to see people cutting back on their entertainment because that's the first thing they cut back on when they can't afford groceries. But if you plan ahead, you can make it through that and come out the other side. It's a business, and you have to think about it like a business.
Yeah. Yeah. There are books that I've written in the past that I'm glad I've written, but in retrospect, I probably would have spent my time working on other things. I mean, that's kind of how I view, and you're going to have, we have writer friends who, it's all about the, it's all about the art is all about, you want to do it with whatever else. And I know you're the same as I am, we want to make money. Granted, we want to write good books. We want to sell, we want to make sure readers are happy, but we want to write books that, clearly are going to appeal to as many readers as possible because we want to sell a lot of books. We want to,
exactly.
And so, I'm sure your mind works the same way as mine does when it comes to, upcoming projects. Like what is going to be the most kind of commercial, like, I don't want to write a book and I'll just use it as an example. My weird Western that I wrote with David B. Silva, Walk the Sky.
Right.
I love that book. I loved writing it with Dave. It was a great experience. But it's a very niche genre. I mean,
it is.
It's done well over the years, but like it is not, it's not like I'm like, going to write any more of those types of books, like because there's just, I want to write books that are, that are just much more commercial. I mean, that's just me. Because again, I'm looking at also as a business. I want to write book or, I want to publish books that are going to have, the most mass appeal to readers.
I'm somewhere in between. I'm 55, so I'm a little older than you. There's a big part of me that still thinks that way. But there's a part of me now, particularly over like the last 5 years, that said, all right, I'm going to get my audience to trust me. I want to experiment and write something just for me and see if I can get them to come along. Like I did The Lost Level, that weird Edgar Rice Burroughs Pellucidar thing. And everyone in the world told me, oh, that's not going to sell. You're crazy. Nobody wants, except Joe Lansdale. Joe Lansdale told me I'm Brian Keene. I should write it and tell everyone else to shut the fuck up. And Joe was right, because my audience took a gamble on it, which then allowed me to write something like End of the Road, this crazy nonfiction memoir about book signings, which again, if I tried to sell that mainstream, I don't think anyone would have bought it. But I was able to sell it to Cemetery Dance, and we were able to get it into bookstores regardless, kind of backdoor it in there. And the book was a big hit, one of the most popular things I've done in a long time. So yeah, I'm somewhere in between. I still want to make money. I want to write commercial stuff that will sell, but I'm also really happy that for the most part, the majority of my audience is willing to let me take a chance here and there and do something different for them.
Yeah. Well, that's definitely one of the benefits, I think, of self-publishing, where you have that freedom to do really whatever you want to do.
Right.
I've also always said that just because you can self-publish doesn't always mean you should, because there are times where some writers just, they're not ready to do that. Maybe just, I mean, there is a lot of shit out there. You can even argue that yes, publishers even publish a lot of really bad books.
Yep.
But there are just a lot of shit that, I mean, anybody can literally just upload something to Kindle.
Well, and that's the thing. Nobody wants to get a rejection letter. Okay. But rejection letters are a crucial part of the process. You learn to write in two ways. You learn, first of all, by writing, but second of all, by getting feedback, professional feedback. And if you're just self-publishing everything you write immediately, from day one, you're never going to get that feedback, and you're never going to improve as a writer. I still think the process of traditional publishing has value in that regard. You know, if you refuse to go that route, then another expense to tack on to the $2,000 is, by all means, hire yourself a professional editor and a professional copy editor. Those are two very different things, but you need both, you know,
Yeah.
and you need to listen to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's and actually that was the other part of my cost. So I had the developmental editor on this most recent do a pass through, because like I have, I have somebody that I usually, I mean, for me, honestly, it is my old high school English teacher. I still in contact with him. He reads my stuff. He tears he tears it apart.
That's
I mean,
cool.
he will read all my books. He will tear it apart, but it really is in a good shape. So that when it gets to a place where, either my agent and I are shopping it around, or where I'm not ready to self-publish it, it's really in a good place. So like I've always had like a proofreader or a copy editor that I would, have kind of go through the manuscript. But this time around, I did reach out to a developmental editor just to kind of see it fresh from a different perspective. It's always nice to kind of get that. But I wanted to mention also, and I mean, there's so many examples of this too. I was thinking of another writer that we know, had a book come out, actually a couple books come out from a major publisher. One of those books even was turned into a TV show. Okay. But then just things kind of fell apart for him in New York. And now he is self-publishing under different pen names, but he's killing it.
Yep.
And at this point he's writing books that he really wants to do. It's not, because that's another thing too. I don't think people realize, publishers, nobody knows what sells books. I mean, if publishers knew what were going to be big books, every single book would be a major success.
Exactly.
They're basically always just kind of taking a chance. It's just an editor really feels like, oh, this is a really good book, or I think I could probably do this with the book, or maybe there's a huge hit. Like, after Da Vinci Code, you had so many books come out that were essentially just clones of the, what I mean? So no one really knows what's going on with, in terms of publishing. But oftentimes when you get to a point where, so I mentioned about the, having this friend who now is self-publishing. Another writer friend that I know was it kind of blew his mind. Like, why would he do that? He was publishing with these big publishers. Like, why would he? And I'm just like, no offense to this friend, but it's like, well, you've clearly have never dealt with publishers, like actual publishers. Cause you start off, there's always this honeymoon period. Everything's great. But after a while, you just really start to hate it's nothing to do with your editors or whatever else. It's just, you just feel like you get, and you're just never happy. And, having that freedom is part of it, being able to just basically control, your books, however you want to price them, what you want your covers to be, how you want to market them. There are times where just, you might pitch you might have a 2-book deal. You might pitch a second book to the publisher. We don't like that idea. We don't like that idea. We don't like that idea. And then you end up starting to write a book that, your heart's not in it, because it's not really a book that you want to write. And I think then, oftentimes it comes across on the page too. Readers can kind of see, like, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah. Happened to me with Random House. They bought Terminal, and the second book was supposed to be Dark Hollow, and they didn't like Dark Hollow. And I pitched like 7 other things, never liked any of them. And it became such a frustrating experience. They never actually got a second book from me, because each pitch was less and less in my heart. It got to the point at the end there where I felt like I was pitching McDonald's Happy Meals rather than books, just to try to get something across the plate.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very funny. I mean, just this idea, I'm just trying, coming up in middle school and high school, reading books, just kind of knowing that I wanted to be a writer, kind of having this vision of what publishing was. And then, seeing it from the outside is always different from when you're on the inside. And then, understanding, how publishing works. And again, it's just, you can become very disillusioned very fast. Because, you just, that's why I think, and I mentioned before about walking around the, used bookstore, you'll see these authors who were, big shit like 10, 15 years ago had a couple of books and then you just never hear from them again.
No.
I don't think it was, I mean, every writer is different, but I think they probably just because the whole writing process the whole publishing process just got, it just wore them down. And maybe it just turned out that like their hearts weren't in it. The publishers didn't want to keep, publishing them and they had nothing else to do. And, I mean, again, back then, if a publisher didn't want to publish you, your career was over.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of writers are basically, where their careers would have ended, they still have, the option to keep doing it. They might not be successful. Some might be more, some are going to be more successful than others. So, I don't know. We're coming up almost on an hour now, so I don't want to kind of keep, take up too much more of your time. But I mean, so like, yeah, let's talk about, what finally pushed you to the point you kind of, addressed it. But at this point,
like I said, we've lost a lot of friends the last few years. And, this week, for example, we just lost Jay Wilburn. And, the first couple times that happens, like, oh shit, that sucks. The 10th or 12th time it happens, you're like, oh shit, yeah, we're all starting to go now. And it really just, it starts you thinking about, again, this is a business. And in my case, my business is to provide for my sons, provide for Mary. So it gets you thinking about what happens if you do unexpectedly die. I've been very, very lucky in that, Jesus and I had planned ahead in case that happened to either one of us. We knew what the other one wanted. And I've tried to leave similar instructions and guidance for the people who will take over my literary estate when I'm gone, but I want to make it as easy as possible. And that's why I just decided, I'm like, you know what, instead of continuing to be a hybrid using, mainstream and various indie publishers and self-publishing some things, I'm just going to self-publish everything. I'm going to get all my rights back, bring everything in-house and do it under my own imprint. Manhattan on Mars, which is sort of a play at, Manhattan is what we think of as the home of publishing. And also Dr. Manhattan gets tired of everybody and goes to Mars in Alan Moore's The Watchmen, which is probably my favorite segment of that graphic novel and often how I feel. But, I'm also aware that, how do I say this without sounding like a douchebag? I'm not some small writer venturing into self-publishing, particularly in the horror genre and particularly in indie publishing, where I to yank all my rights overnight, I would effectively cause another financial collapse. It would be small. It would only be in indie publishing, but it would happen. So, this is something that I'm deliberately doing very slowly. Was just talking with Rose from Deadite Press this week, and I gave her a list. I think it's 6 books for next year, staggered throughout the year, rather than the whole backlist that she has. It's something that will take several years, and we'll do it slowly, but eventually everything's here in house. And if I kick the bucket, there's one primary source for income every month, and the kids aren't chasing down rights, etc. There's a few things I won't do. I won't do signed collectible limited edition hardcovers. I don't think self-publishing technology has grown to the point where anybody should be doing those yet. Those are, in fact, works of art. And for the prices people and collectors are paying for them, I think they need more put into them. And I'm not doing audiobooks. I view audiobooks the same way as I do movies or comic book adaptations or video game adaptations of my work. They're transformative work. When a narrator reads it, it's somebody else. So I'm not going to venture into audiobooks. I'm happy to leave those with the publishers. But yeah, paperbacks, trade hardcovers, ebooks, all through me from now on.
You know what? That actually audiobooks is another thing that you can produce yourself. So I know
Yeah.
some writers have done that. I've even done that myself. The upfront cost is much more expensive, especially if
Yes.
you want to basically pay a narrator. You're looking at probably at least $200 per finished hour. So, if a book is going to be 10 hours long, you're looking at $2,000 just for the narrator. And often you can also do it where you are splitting the royalties with the narrators too. So but and then the same thing with Amazon. Mostly the only way to do it is through ACX, which is how you get your books onto Audible. And for a while it used to be a 50-50 split from the author narrator to they could split the 50% and then Audible. And then at some point they were like, because they're like the only game in town, it became a 60-40 split to Audible. So if you were producing your own audiobooks and you were splitting out with a narrator, basically it was 20% each.
Yep.
Which quite honestly, even in going through a major, if the publishers, I think the standard rate for that is maybe like 25% anyway.
Right.
So I remember an author had reached out to me. He's done really well with audiobooks, and he had even said, if you have the money and you're able to do it, it's worth it. But again, the cost for that is, it can add up.
Right.
And the same thing too with audiobooks. It's also very hard because at least with, and you've been doing this recently, like you can promote your backlist. You can do price decreases or price promotions, or
99-cent sales.
with whatever else. With audiobooks, you don't really have that power, at least as of right now, going through ACX. So it's there, and it's not the same type of algorithm, but so and I forgot to mention though, for people who are interested, in terms of self-publishing, audiobooks is something you can, do as well, but there is definitely a lot more to it. It's really, I think really it comes down to whatever you feel comfortable doing. Because we have a lot of author friends who, they publish with New York publishers. They've gotten the rights back from some of their books, but they're just holding on to them for whatever reason.
It's
They're just sitting
frustrating.
on them. I mean, they don't want to self-publish them themselves. Okay, fine. I mean, there are other publishers out there, mostly digital publishers, who could put them out too. Some authors I know, and I guess I get this, where I guess in the back of their head they're thinking like, oh, one of these days, like Random House is going to want to come and republish these books, and it's like, okay. In the meantime, you can still put those out yourself. I mean, there's nothing, if for whatever reason it gets to a place where Random House wants to come and republish your books, they're not going to care that it's also, and you also then own the IP. You can take those down at any point you want.
Yep.
But again, I've gotten to a place where it's like, what, the whole idea of, being evangelical or, in terms of just self-publishing, I figure at this point, writers, I don't know. I just keep rambling here.
At this point, all the information is there.
Yes, exactly.
Other people have blazed the trail. They've test driven the car. They've kicked the tires. You have all the information you need to make an informed decision. I think we are looking at an upcoming period of very seismic changes across the board in publishing, both mainstream and indie.
Well, I mean, look at Barnes & Noble. Barnes & Noble has been pulling back on hardcover orders. I have some writer friends who write YA and in middle grade, and essentially, Barnes & Noble is just not going to carry hardcovers anymore. And so for a lot of these authors, that's a huge hit for them. The same thing with adult fiction. I mean, they are still going to carry, some hardcovers, but not as much as they probably would have 5 years ago.
Yep.
And again, when you look at things,
add to that, the entire comic book industry is collapsing. There are earth-shaking changes coming, and now is the time. I've always said authors should diversify, never put all your eggs in one basket, meaning never just work with one publisher or one format. But now it's pretty much diversify or die. If you are a writer and you intend to approach this as a business and you intend to make a living or make money doing it, now is the time to start getting your feet wet and looking into some of these other options that you have, or you can wait till everything collapses and changes again and then try it. But then it's too late because everybody else is doing it too.
And then you have the argument where they're like, well, Amazon could go away tomorrow, or, they could change their terms. And now all of a sudden you're not getting 70%, you're getting 50% or whatever else. And it's like, true.
They could,
but the
there's
same
also,
thing then would affect, major publishing if
Yeah.
Amazon were to go away tomorrow.
And Amazon's not the only game. Ingram now has self-publishing. B&N Press now has self-publishing. There's all kinds of other options out there. You don't have to rely on Amazon if you don't want to.
And that's another thing too. Some friends of ours have also been working for more direct sales, trying to get the readers to not use Amazon, to really just buy directly from them. That's another thing too. And that goes back to, even terms when we talked about music and movies, and even thinking about it, even comedy albums. I remember Louis C.K. before he became, shunned, you would just go to his website, you would buy his most recent album. I think it was like $5. I mean, he was making a killing off of that. So, I mean, a lot of artists do this. And I mean, that probably is the future too. I mean, can you imagine 20 years ago, when you were in that Barnes and Noble and Don came up to you, that we'd be sitting here almost about 10 years later, or 20 years later, and this is the state of publishing and, at bookstores? I mean, just imagine how things are going to be in another 10, 20 years.
Yep. We've ridden through 2 economic recessions now. I've gone through 2 entire collapses of the horror genre, 2.5, depending on who you ask. In another 20 years, I can't even imagine what it'll look like, because it looks so vastly different now from when we started out. But I know that if you want to stay viable, you have to stay on top of these things. You have to continue to take an interest and, explore trends and explore technologies as they emerge.
Yeah. So, okay. So to recap, for people who are interested in self-publishing, I mean, again, at this point, just Google. There are so many websites that can really give you just pointers on how to do it. There are programs out there. If you want to format, the one I use and the one I recommended to you, Brian, is called Vellum. It only works for Macs. Essentially, you can easily build an ebook and paperback. Looks just as professional as anything that is coming out of New York.
Yep.
And it's very easy to use. I mean, I told you our friend Tim Levin, I told him about that years ago. He even said that he's a Luddite when it comes to technology. He was able to do it
I mean,
all
look,
on his own.
I still handwrite notes to myself on scraps of paper, for what I'm working on. I got Post-it notes all over the place. I suck at technology. Vellum, I picked it up in, I think, 3 days it took me to figure everything out. Now, occasionally I still get stuck and I'll call or text you and, hey, how do I do this? And you walk me through it. Usually you send me a Google link, which I could have probably found myself, but it's just, I'm old, so I like to bother you. But yeah, no, I highly recommend Vellum. It's very easy to use.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, back in the day, you were spending extra money to, hire somebody to format the ebook, to format the paperback. I mean, I think in the past couple of years, for people who want to self-publish, the cost to do so has actually decreased. Even finding good cover arts. I mean, there's a lot of artists out there where you can, I don't know, where you can probably get pre-made covers for a really cheap, cost. But a lot of these designers, I mean, one of my designers that I use, I mean, New York publishers use them. I mean, so like oftentimes self-published books at this point are, readers cannot tell that if it's a book that is, from New York or it's self-published. I mean, if a self-published writer is really doing their job the right way, it's the same quality across the board as anything coming out of New York. And again, I mean, the playing field is just leveled, whereas before, no distribution, no way, no how self-publishing was going to do anything. Now it's like again, I mean, quite honestly, it's really the future for, I think, majority of writers, just because, you know, it is anybody can do it who wants to
Right.
do it. It's just really, I think, whether or not they have what it takes to do it well. But you know, again, all that stuff is on the web. You know, you can you can find it anywhere, and God knows what's going to happen in the next 5, 10 years. Because oh, another thing too, and I think this is really not if you're self-publishing or even going through New York, build a news, you know, a newsletter. Um, Sometimes I had this one writer friend who every once in a while would be like, you know, have you created a newsletter yet? It's like, yeah, I'm working on it. Another year or two goes by. Have you done it yet? No, I'm working on it. And I mean, they publish by a big publisher. It's like you need a newsletter. You know, people aren't going to blogs anymore. Social media is only going so far, especially because God knows what's going to happen to Twitter if Elon Musk buys it.
I giggle. I remember early on, like 99, 2000, there were two writers in our field that I knew had newsletters, myself and Doug Clegg. You know, we kind of pioneered that shit, you know, talking about email newsletters, not print. And, you know, then of course, newsletters got replaced by blogging, which got replaced by early social media, which got replaced by the social media that we have now. And what I find interesting is newsletters are now back in fashion again, and probably more popular than ever. It feels in a way like we've come full circle in that regard.
So I don't know if I should say this. He might get pissed off, but I actually had a recent conversation with Doug,
Just
and
blame it on me. Doug,
and
this
and
wasn't Rob.
and
This was
and
my
somehow
fault.
that came up. He said back in the day when he was doing that newsletter, like he
Yeah.
was doing that thing where he was kind of giving away the free stuff. So many writers tried to give him that he knew were giving him shit. You know,
Really?
what were you like? You know, why are you doing this? Like, this is a terrible idea. And now I would say almost all writers who have a newsletter, you know, signing up, you get something free. I mean, he
Yeah.
was so ahead of the curve on that, so ahead of his time.
He always
Um,
was. What was it? Was it Naomi that he serialized?
yes, yeah,
Yeah. You know, I always point to that. People, I had a reporter talk about me doing Earthworm Gods 2 Deluge free on my website, you know, back in the day. I'm like, hey, I wasn't the first. Doug Clegg did that first. You know, every really genius marketing idea I ever had, I ripped off from Doug Clegg. So, you know, if people were giving him shit about that, that just goes to show you how many morons we have in this industry.
yeah. Well, anyway, I mean, yeah, just the publishing is interesting. Is definitely an interesting industry, and it really has evolved crazily in the last 20 years. Because
It
again,
has.
self-publishing. I mean, I remember being at a bar. It was either World Horror or it was a Bram Stoker. You know, there would be a few writers there who would have tables of books that were self-published, and you always just like, I don't know, I just felt bad for them. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, like sorry, sons of bitches. Because like no one was coming up to them. I mean, it was just they were just there. And now, I mean, you run these cons. You run what was it, Author Con?
Author
You
Con.
would say the majority of the authors there are people or writers who basically a good chunk of them have just self-published stuff, and it's just as good as
Yeah,
anything
I'd say
else.
about 60%. You know, and about half of our guests of honor are self-published, and they're just as big of a draws as, you know, anybody New York published. Um,
So,
it's a
but
whole different world now.
it is a whole different world. So I'm hoping that anybody who slogged through this entire thing found it helpful. So I mean, yeah, so publishing has definitely changed, and it's going to keep changing. That's the other thing too. We have no idea how it's going to change. I mean, bookstores. I mean, well, so okay. So what do you think about Barnes and Noble? And you've been saying for years you think they're going under. I'm a little bit more
No,
optimistic. I think that they.
I thought Borders would go under, and I was right. I've never thought Barnes and Noble would go under. And in fact, I see a lot of hope for Barnes and Noble, because, you know, their latest CEO he's trying to transform them from not selling calendars and Doctor Who bobbleheads and all this bullshit that you find at the front of the store. You know, he's trying to make them a bookstore again. They're giving managers and employees a lot more of a free hand in what to order. That's why you're seeing horror sections pop up in Barnes and Noble again, and they're specifically curated, to the demographic, the local demographic. I have great hope for Barnes and Noble. Same with Waterstones. I think Waterstones will probably do good too, as long as they continue to offer that experience. If they're going to become Target, where they sell all kinds of things and also books, then yeah, they're going to fail, just like Borders did. But if they continue to be bookstores and they offer the experience of being able to go in and find curated sections and books that you can pick up and look at rather than on Amazon, then yeah, I think they'll stay in business, and indeed, I think they'll continue to do better.
Yeah. No, hopefully.
Yeah,
Hopefully. And
I'm Amazon is what it is. It's a necessary evil. It's like Google. It's like anything else that we use now. Apple. I would love to see a strong competitor emerge against Amazon. I don't think it will. But if Barnes and Noble and Waterstones can kind of hold the line in the brick and mortar space, then they deserve our support. That's why you go on my website, you click the books section. Sure, there's an Amazon link, but there's also Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Waterstones, Book Depository. I want to give people options.
Yeah,
never want to limit them to just one source.
And even, quite honestly, even during the pandemic, I know in Lancaster, there was a new independent bookstore that, opened. Not only were, so they were even saying that, independent bookstores are starting to kind of flourish more, which is great.
Yeah.
Having that diversity of the indies. So, it's definitely a crazy industry. Definitely
let's do this again in 20 years and see where it is.
Definitely for people. All right. Yeah. Only if they let me into the nursing facility to meet with you. So, but all right, Brian, I appreciate you. I appreciate you hanging out, and
absolutely, brother, anytime.
And everybody check out Brian's books, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, everywhere else. And again, if you have any questions about self-publishing, use Google. So thank you, everybody.
All right.
Hold on.